In school, they told me I would never be more than the poor girl with the cheap clothes. They laughed at my shoes, my backpack, my secondhand jacket. They said I would end up serving them coffee one day. In today's story, I'm going to tell you how my rich classmates mocked me for years, how they turned every school day into a reminder that I didn't belong in their world, and how years later I became their boss and sat at the head of the table they once thought was reserved for people like them. If you enjoy long, emotional revenge stories about rich versus poor, school bullying, and karma showing up in the workplace, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the very end, because the way this story comes full circle is something they never prepared for. But I did. My name is Clara, and I grew up in a neighborhood where people didn't talk about career paths or networking. They talked about paying rent, surviving the month, and hoping your job didn't disappear overnight. My mother worked as a cashier in a supermarket, standing for hours with a forced smile while customers complained about prices she had no control over. My father did whatever he could find: construction, deliveries, occasional night shifts as security. We had food, but never extras. Every new school year was a financial operation. Notebooks bought on promotion, uniforms used until the fabric almost gave up. I liked school, not the building or the teachers necessarily, but the idea that my brain could be a way out. I studied hard, stayed late, and did all the extra credit I could get. When I was finishing middle school, my grades got the attention of one of my teachers. He told my parents about a scholarship program at an elite private school across town, a place where the children of CEOs, doctors, judges, and politicians studied. The scholarship would cover my tuition. The school would give opportunities to talented low-income students. At least that's what their brochure said. It sounded like a dream, a chance to change my future. We didn't realize that walking into that school would also mean walking straight into a battlefield of class. On my first day at the new school, I wore the official uniform, or at least the version my parents could afford. The blazer was secondhand, bought from another family whose child had outgrown it. The stitching on one sleeve was a little loose. My shoes weren't the shiny leather ones most students wore. They were a cheaper brand, stiff and already starting to crease. I took 2 buses to get there, clutching my bag and trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. When I walked through the school gates, I thought I had stepped into another universe. The campus had gardens, a cafeteria that looked like a mall food court, a swimming pool, and even a theater. Groups of students stood around in perfectly clean uniforms, laughing like nothing in the world had ever truly hurt them. I went to the office, got my schedule, and made my way to my first class. When I entered the classroom, conversations dropped just a little. Eyes turned to me, sliding from my face to my blazer, my shoes, my backpack. I smiled awkwardly and found a seat in the middle row. A girl with perfect hair and a tiny gold necklace leaned toward her friend and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "New scholarship, I bet." The friend giggled. "I hope she knows we don't do charity projects here," she replied. My cheeks burned, but I kept my eyes on my notebook. I had barely been there 10 minutes, and they had already decided what I was. The comments never stopped. They just changed shape. At first, it was small things. Cute shoes. Where did you get them? The bargain bin. Wow, your backpack survived another day? Impressive. Do they not sell mirrors in your part of town? Then it escalated. One day I walked into class and found a note on my desk. On it, someone had drawn a stick figure in a badly drawn blazer and written, "Scholarship project, do not feed." Everyone laughed when I saw it. During a school event when we all had to wear blazers, one of the boys, Raphael, the son of a plastic surgeon, tugged at my sleeve and said, "You know they make uniforms in your size too, right? Or did you steal that one from the donation box?" Another time, at lunch, a group of girls, the same ones with perfect hair and matching notebooks, started a conversation about brands. "I could never wear fake labels," one of them said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "I'd rather not wear anything than wear cheap copies." Her eyes slid to my shoes. The others followed her gaze and laughed. It was clear. The message wasn't, "Your clothes are different." The message was, "You are less." To be fair, not all adults were monsters. Some teachers genuinely believed in the scholarship program. They praised my grades, gave me extra material, told me I had a bright future if I kept working hard. But even the kind ones didn't fully see what was happening. They saw my scores, my participation, the way I turned in everything on time. They didn't see the notes in my locker. They didn't hear the whispers in the hallway. They didn't sit in the cafeteria and feel the way tables divided like magnets avoiding each other. Once, when a teacher asked the class to pair up for a project, no one moved toward me. I pretended to look through my bag so it wouldn't be so obvious that I was left standing alone. The teacher noticed and said, "Clara, why don't you join Sophia and Marcella?" The girls forced smiles. We did the assignment. They copied my work and then posted selfies together with captions like Team Excellence. I wasn't in any of the photos. On paper, I was a success story. Poor girl earning her spot in a rich world. In reality, I was tolerated as long as I kept my head down and my grades up. There was a moment, several actually, when I considered trying to fit in. I thought about getting a part-time job just to buy one brand-name pair of shoes. I thought about lying about where I lived, saying we had downsized from a better neighborhood. I thought about changing the way I spoke, flattening my accent until it sounded like theirs. But then I would go home. I would see my mother counting coins at the table, exhausted, but still asking me how my day went. I would see my father sleeping in a chair after a night shift, boots still on his feet. I would see my little brother doing homework on the couch using my old notebooks. I realized something important. If I started pretending I was like my classmates, I would be betraying the people who had sacrificed everything just so I could be there. I didn't want to be like them. I wanted to beat them. But not at fashion, or vacations, or cars. At life. So I made a choice. I would stop wasting energy trying to impress people who had already decided I was beneath them. Instead, I would focus on the one thing they couldn't take from me, what I knew. From that point on, I turned school into my battlefield, but my weapon wasn't revenge. It was discipline. While my classmates spent their afternoons at tennis practice, shopping malls, and expensive cafes, I took the bus home, did my homework, and then studied more. While they joked in class and checked their phones under the desk, I took detailed notes and asked questions. They had private tutors. I had the public library, they had connections, I had determination. The funny thing is, even as they mocked my clothes, they started to depend on my brain. "Hey, Clara, can you send me your notes from last week? I missed class." "Clara, do you understand question 5? Can you explain it to me real quick?" "Clara, I know you already did the reading. Is the test hard?" Sometimes I helped, sometimes I didn't. It depended less on how they asked, and more on how I was feeling that day. But inside, I kept a quiet list of names. Not to get revenge on in school, but to never forget who they really were behind their smiles. At graduation, everyone cried and took pictures in caps and gowns. My classmates hugged each other and promised to stay in touch forever, even though most of them only stayed in touch with whoever could keep up with their lifestyle. Some of them went straight into family businesses. Others went to the best universities, funded entirely by their parents. I got into a good university on scholarships and loans. I worked nights at a coffee shop and spent days in class, exhausted, but determined. We started from the same graduation stage, but we were not starting from the same place. They had money as a safety net. If they failed, they could fall and still land on something soft. If I failed, the ground was concrete. So I didn't fail. University was hard, but for the first time, I wasn't just the poor girl. I was just the girl who always knew the answer. My clothes were still cheap. My bag was still secondhand. But people looked at my face when they spoke to me, not at my shoes. After graduating, I got an entry-level job at a mid-sized company in the tech field. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I worked, learned, moved up, and then something unexpected happened. I noticed how badly many companies treated young workers. No training, no real growth paths. Lots of talk about talent, but no investment in it. So I started to dream bigger. Not just about climbing the ladder, but about building my own. It didn't happen overnight. I spent years working, saving, studying the market on weekends, attending free online courses, and asking questions to anyone more experienced who would give me 5 minutes of their time. I saw a gap in the market. Small and mid-sized businesses needed help with digital transformation, but big consulting firms were too expensive and too out of touch with their reality. I knew how to talk to people without condescension. I knew how it felt to be on the bottom looking up. So, in my late 20s, I took the biggest risk of my life. I quit my stable job and started my own consulting company. At first, it was just me, my laptop, and a tiny rented desk in a co-working space that smelled like coffee and anxiety. I worked like my life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Slowly, clients came. One recommended me to another. Results spoke louder than my lack of fancy office furniture. Within a few years, I had a small team, then a bigger team. Then I moved into a real office. Nothing huge, but ours. I became officially a founder and CEO. The girl they laughed at for her cheap blazer was now the woman signing paychecks. One Monday morning, my HR manager came into my office with a small stack of resumes. "We have several candidates for the new manager positions," she said. "Some of them come from really strong schools and backgrounds. Take a look." I started flipping through the resumes, scanning education, experience, skills. Then I saw a name I recognized, then another. Sophia, Marcella, Raphael, my former classmates, the ones who commented on my shoes, the ones who left notes on my desk, the ones who called me charity project. I stared at the pages for a long moment, a strange mix of shock and something darkly satisfying rising in my chest. "They all studied at Nome da Escola Rica," my HR manager said. "You went there too, right?" "Yes," I replied slowly. "I did." She smiled. "Well, maybe that means they're a good fit culturally." I almost laughed. Culturally. I told her I would personally sit in on some of the final interviews. Sophia was the first one to come in. She wore an elegant blazer, perfect makeup, and the same air of casual superiority she'd had in school, just slightly cracked around the edges now that she was on the job-seeking side of the table. She didn't recognize me at first. "Good morning," she said with a practiced smile. "Thank you for seeing me." We started the interview. She talked about her degree, her internships, her experience working for her father's company. At one point, she made a joke about knowing how to manage teams that come from less privileged backgrounds, and how she was used to adapting her communication for people who weren't on her level yet. I let her finish. Then I leaned back and said, "Sophia, do you remember high school?" She blinked, thrown off. Yes," she said cautiously. "Why?" "Do you remember a girl named Clara?" I asked. "You once left a note on her desk that said, 'Scholarship project, do not feed.'" Her face went pale. I don't... That was just a joke," she stammered. "We were kids. It wasn't serious." "I was that girl," I said quietly. Silence. You could almost hear the sound of her heart stopping for a second. I didn't realize," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. We were stupid back then. It wasn't personal." "It was very personal," I replied, still calm. "But this interview isn't about high school. It's about who you are now." I continued the interview professionally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't humiliate her. But I did see who she really was when she was no longer surrounded by people just like her. She wasn't used to being the one without power. After interviewing all of them, Sophia, Marcella, Raphael, and several other candidates who had nothing to do with my past, I sat with my HR manager to make decisions. Some of my former classmates were technically qualified, but their attitudes hadn't changed much. They still spoke down about less educated people. They still thought culture fit meant people who act and look like us. They still believed they were doing companies a favor just by showing up. On the other hand, there were candidates who reminded me more of myself. A woman who had worked 2 jobs while finishing her degree. A man who didn't have a fancy last name but had solid, hard-earned experience. A candidate who admitted she had made mistakes early in her career and learned from them instead of blaming everyone else. In the end, I chose the people who aligned with the culture I wanted. Respect, work, growth, no arrogance. My HR manager raised an eyebrow when she saw that none of my old school classmates had made the cut. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Some of them have impressive backgrounds." "They also have a pattern," I said, "and we're not building that pattern here." I didn't tell her about the chalk drawings on my desk or the shoe jokes or the notes. I didn't need to. My decision was final. We sent out polite, standard rejection emails. Thank you for your interest. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you all the best in your career. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would end up on social media as some kind of spectacle. A week later, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Raphael. Hey Clara, he wrote. I didn't know you owned this company. Wow, you've done great. I guess those scholarship kids really do go far, huh? Would love to grab a coffee and catch up, maybe talk about other opportunities together. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, thank you. I'm focusing on building my team with people who align with our values right now. Good luck with your search. Short, polite, final. My revenge wasn't about destroying their careers. The world would handle their mediocrity on its own. My revenge was knowing that when they walked into that interview room, they thought they were on familiar ground. They expected someone like them to hold the power. Instead, they found the girl whose shoes they once laughed at, sitting in the boss's chair. Sometimes people ask me if I ever go back to visit the old school. I did once for a talk about social mobility and overcoming adversity. They invited me as a success story, the scholarship kid who made it. I stood on that same stage where we'd once had assemblies, looking out at faces dressed in the same uniforms I used to wear. I told them the truth. I told them that grades matter, but character matters more. That money can open doors, but arrogance can close them from the inside. That the way you treat the poor kid in your class says more about your future than any brand you wear. I walked out of that school feeling lighter. I wasn't the girl trying to survive those hallways anymore. I wasn't the one being looked down on. I was the one choosing who gets a seat at my table. In the end, it was never about clothes. Clothes fade, tear, go out of style. What doesn't fade is how people make you feel, and what you decide to do with that feeling. They used their parents' money as a shield. I used their cruelty as fuel. And when the time came, I didn't scream. I didn't throw the past in their faces. I just did what they never imagined I could. I said, no, you don't fit here. If you've ever been mocked for your clothes, your backpack, your shoes, or anything that showed you didn't have as much money as the people around you, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have tried to fit in, avoided them forever, or waited for life to bring you back together on different terms? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that being underestimated today doesn't define who you get to be tomorrow. And if you want more long, emotional revenge stories about rich versus poor, school bullying, and power-shifting hands, stay tuned. Season 1 is still unfolding.